The following presentation is part of the Beyond the Blast Doors network.
Thank you so much for joining me. How you doing?
Doing really good. Thanks for having me.
This is a blast. I got to know your name when the list of authors for the From a Certain Point of View 40th anniversary of Empire Strikes Back came out, and reached out to you. So that's how I was fortunate enough to learn about you. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your writing.
So I have, I guess, almost 3 novels. Like my 3rd novel comes out in January, all with HarperCollins. Even though like my work with Star Wars is obviously in the space opera field, I'm mostly known for writing character-driven science fiction. My first book was called Here and Now and Then, and it was a time travel father-daughter story that was up for some awards. My second book was called A Beginning at the End. It was a post-pandemic novel that came out in January of 2020. So it's been an interesting year seeing that literally come to life in so many ways. And my 3rd novel is called We Could Be Heroes, and that's a superhero story that comes out in January. Before that, I was a sports writer. I covered the NHL for Fox Sports and a bunch of other sites. And I have been a Star Wars fan like literally my whole life. Like one of my earliest memories is being in Toys R Us with the Empire Strikes Back Tauntaun kit and then taking it home, and it's like the rubber Tauntaun with like the slit in the middle, so where you can stuff your Luke figure in there. Yes, that's one of my earliest memories.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like the Empire Strikes Back toys were like the beginning of just being prepared, and all the toys were so much fun, and they had the mini rigs and that whole thing. So were you playing with the toys before you saw the movies?
I think so. Like I know I saw Jedi in the theater because I remember when they took off Vader's helmet, like I was very disturbed because I was 5 at the time. And we went immediately to I think it was Kmart afterwards, and like they had the storybook there, and like my brother and I immediately started thumbing through the storybook. So I know I saw that one in the theater. I'm pretty sure my parents probably took me to see Empire, even though I probably didn't understand it at the time. But because it was so prevalent in like toys and advertising and everything, it was just like it's always there. Like I knew I wanted Han Solo's blaster, like, and at Kmart like they had it in the aisle, and it made like this wheezing sound, like, and you twist the dial, and like the wheezing sound would change. Does not sound like Han Solo's blaster at all, but I really wanted that. Yeah. Around that time, like we also had a snow speeder, and I remember like there were little light bulbs in like the blaster cannons, and our blaster cannons just broke off. So like all of these details I remember about my early Star Wars days.
Explore a little bit. So the story you're doing in that comes out in November 10th, I believe, is the day.
Yes,
is called The Disturbance in the Force, and that's all we can talk about. But what I'd love to hear about is how did you get involved, and how did you end up getting the gig writing a story in this fantastic collection of authors, from everybody from a couple people I've never heard of to Kevin Scott and Jason Fry. And so how did that happen for you?
When I signed with my agent in 2015, like we talked about like pie in the sky, like dream projects. And I said, like, one of them is like write for Star Wars. Like if there's any intellectual property out there, I want to write for Star Wars. And I feel like I love Star Wars, Star Trek, and Doctor Who, like all pretty equally. But I feel like I could write Star Wars the best from no pun intended, from a certain point of view. Like I could not write like a really epic, like really like space opera type thing, but like I love how their collection of books like really deviates into like some stuff is really character focused, and I think I could really do a good job with that. So like my agent knew that, and he's been like trying to, like, the way that you get intellectual property work is basically like you get on like their roster
Mhm.
of potential writers, and then like they'll contact you if and then like sometimes you have to write an audition piece. I did not have to write an audition piece for Star Wars, thankfully. And then you start talking about it. I made it really known, and like I was very shouty about it on social media too. So there were several times where like there was these memes going around Twitter where it was like shoot your shot. And I forget the actor. I forget the actor's name, but he's going to play Shang-Chi in the Marvel universe, and he had tweeted about it like about a year before he got cast. And then when they announced his casting, like there was this meme going around of like shoot your shot, say what you really want to do. And I had been preparing this list, like actually based on the first From a Certain Point of View anthology. I wrote out, I think, 30 story pitches chronologically for the Phantom Menace, and this is still on Twitter. Wow. Like if you look around for this. And so when it was time to do the shoot your shot meme, like I just did a massive thread of this. And then I knew some of the other authors who've already written for Star Wars, and they're really helpful in boosting that. And I saw that it did get several likes from some of the editors on there. So I'm like, okay, at the very least, I don't know if this is going anywhere, but they know I exist, and that's all that matters.
That's great. That's great. And so you got the call, and what's the process for determining which, because they're like we said, there's 40 stories in this book, and it's everything from a Palpatine story to a story about Jackson, the green rabbit-eared alien from Kevin. So did you pitch what you wanted, or did they give you some options?
They gave me
How does that work?
They gave me a short list of, because this thing was put together apparently pretty quickly, and it was rolling the whole time. So by the time I came on board, a number of characters were already taken. And so they gave me a short list of, I think, maybe like 15 characters that were still there. And they said, like, just come up with some pitches, and then we'll talk about it. And if you have a preference for a pitch, let us know. So I remember looking at the list, and there were a few, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about like my alternate pitches. There's really fun stories, and the editor, Tom, he said like, okay, well, any of these would work. But I told him like, if they will buy off of my Palpatine pitch, like I really want to do it, because it's like, if you're going to do this, go big or go home,
Sure.
Like if it's those other stories are like cool little character stories, but they really wouldn't have made much difference to the canon and to like the legacy of Star Wars. But this does. And so that was my, like, if you're going to do it, just do it.
Yeah. I think I love that concept, that way of thinking, because we may all kind of care about Wilro Hood, but he's not a pivotal character in the story. But to be able to write a little bit about Palpatine at that time is really quite an honor, and a really cool
I still can't believe it's real. I mean, seriously, like I will sometimes just like look at like the page with my name and like the image of Palpatine and just kind of laugh like an idiot. It's amazing. It is literally like my whole life has culminated in the release of this book.
You're just getting started though. This is the
I hope so.
This is great. This is it's a super exciting thing. Yeah, I mean, I didn't get the chance. I've told this story before, so I'll tell the very short version. But when I was writing for Star Wars Galaxy magazine at the time, there was the Star Wars Adventure Journal, and do you remember the West End game Star Wars?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So they had this Star Wars Adventure Journal, which every quarter they would release a paperback book, which had a bunch of short stories, and then with those stories, then they would also, like, if there's a new ship identified or a character, they would provide all the gaming statistics and things. And I had written a story, I think it's about 10,000 words, and about it's ironically about a pilot who defected and made the decision that he's not sure if he's Imperial or Rebel, but he knows he's not what he is at that moment. And and it went through all the editing and the process and the whole thing, and then literally it was supposed to be in the next issue, and West End Games overnight got out of the Star Wars role-playing game business, and so my story just sits in a manila envelope over there on my other desk. It just waits for its next shot. But that whole process is just so cool to have other people look at it, and what you bring to Star Wars comes from where you came from.
Yeah, yeah, and like, there's details that like I want to talk about, because it's like, they're elements of a lot of my favorite things, and to write that, like, the connective tissue was very purposeful to weave all that together, but I just can't say it right now.
Yeah. No, I know it's we'll have you back on after November 10th. We can nerd out about all the stories in the book. So let's talk. So let's talk a little bit about you. You've written for a bunch of different websites with some different concepts, and you're super active on Twitter with some really cool Star Wars stuff that you throw out to the universe to engage in. But I wanted to talk a little bit because you have I think she's 4 years old, your daughter?
She's 6.
6.
She just turned 6 in August.
Okay. And you just recently showed her Star Wars in the Machete order.
Yes. In an augmented version of the Machete order.
Correct. Yes, exactly. So this article is in Nerdist?
Nerdist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So there'll be a link for it in the show notes. First of all, go check this article out if you haven't. I think it's interesting because I have an 8-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter, and so the same kind of questions and decisions you had, I went through, and I totally associated with it. Maybe tell us a little bit about that story. With you don't have to read your article, but what went into some of your decisions? Because I mean, as a parent, you want to make sure that they enjoy Star Wars,
right?
But there's so many. I went through the same sort of, how do I show it to my kids? You were much more successful with it, but tell me a little bit about the process for you.
So you can obviously tell that this is very, very, very important to my wife and I. So on my wife and I, like on our first lunch date where we met, like she was wearing a Princess Leia t-shirt, and this was in 2002. So it's like Star Wars was like back, but like not like just everywhere like it is today. And so like it's. She is as nerd. She actually is the first person who introduced me to playing D&D. So like, like we've helped each other integrate into various levels of nerddom. So when I think we started talking about this when she got pregnant, like, it was like, it's one of those like, haha, this is kind of silly and not really that important, but it's important to us.
Yeah.
So we discussed it because like, I am a very ardent defender of the prequels. I acknowledge that there's some execution misfires in them, but I love the world. I love the story that it's trying to tell, and I love the gray morality of it. And my wife sometimes has trouble overlooking the execution problems, though she did say, like, after we watched all of this together, that she really enjoyed it a lot more. She hadn't really seen them since. I think we did a marathon before The Force Awakens came out. So it's been a while since she had seen them. But we talked about different things. Like, did we go just like the original trilogy? Because it's like the least complicated method to do that. But then I was like, I really want to try this because I think it was going to give a lot of weight. And also because there's so much imagery in the books and stuff. Like all the kids' books, like we have like Star Wars ABCs, like A is for Anakin, So she's like, who are these people? And she has like a Yoda plushie with a lightsaber, and she doesn't see Yoda with a lightsaber in the original trilogy. So I thought it made sense based on all of the spoiler-free merchandise that we've bought her, and like all this like little stories that we've read her. Like we kept everything very spoiler free. Like we would change the words if like we have one called I'm a Princess. It's Princess Leia, and it talks about her parents and shows Padme and Anakin. And like we do not mention that page. We just say like she wants to be a hero like Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker. Like so we don't mention her parents. We totally changed that. So we went with it also because The Phantom Menace is the most kid friendly. Right. So that really factored into the decision too. And like our daughter had seen, like we showed her the trailers for The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, just because it's like a really cool visual thing.
Yep.
And she had glommed onto Rey from the Forces of Destiny shorts. So she was really excited to see that, but like she didn't understand the context of it. So we're like,
Sure.
okay, we're gonna treat like the first 6 movies plus some Clone Wars as like its own thing, and then we'll kind of like take off from there wherever our daughter wants to go. So that was it was it took a lot of planning. And I mean, there was one good thing about this summer, like with the California wildfires, where we were basically just like with COVID, you could still go out to the park, you could still go for a bike ride, and we were doing all of that. And then the wildfires hit, and like we could not go anywhere literally for like 2 months. So we had already started at that point, and then we're just like, okay, I think she's old enough to like emotionally understand what's going on. And so like we just kind of rewatched what we had already watched, and then just really dove into it.
Right. So it was one of the interesting things in your article is, first of all, the recognition that I think some of us forget about Phantom Menace is that it really does work for kids. That, you know,
it's amazing. Yeah, it's like so, you know, when I first saw it, I was like, Jar Jar's fine. And then like the second time I saw it, I was like, oh my God, Jar Jar, what is happening? And then I just kind of got used to it. And I love Ahmed Best, you know, as a person. And he's such a great, you know, voice for just so many things on like literally, and also like, you know, as an activist. And so like, I always felt bad about hating Jar Jar, but it's such a, no pun intended, jarring like tonal shift. Because you have like these very serious Jedi, and then you have basically Goofy, you know, in a strange voice. But then watching it with her was really incredible. Like she just gravitated towards him right away, and she gravitated towards Anakin, and she really empathized with Anakin. Like the idea that these strange dudes were just going to take him away from his mom. And that was like, that was really hard for her to comprehend. And so it's really fascinating seeing it from someone who, her perspective is, she doesn't think about prequels versus original, Disney versus Lucasfilm, CG versus, you know, proper effects. She doesn't think about any of that. She's just involved in the story. And that was really, really gratifying to see. And like, and you can tell, like, I know like Lucas really retconned a lot of stuff. I mean, you have to if you're writing a prequel. But it seems like watching it now as a like really cohesive piece of art. There's so much thought that I think a lot of people do not give him credit to, and you have to kind of watch it in this sequence to really understand the breadth of what he was trying to say.
Yeah, so there's another podcaster, a guy named Ken Knobsock, and he calls himself a reformed prequelist, and I would say the same thing, because I was very fortunate in that I went to the New York premieres of all the prequels. I walked out of Phantom Menace with this sort of, you know, my favorite story, I've told it in the past, was I walked out, and as I'm leaving Phantom Menace, with this sort of weird, I don't know what I just saw, kind of thinking, you know, because I as a child of Star Wars, you had built this up. It could have been a fantastic movie, like a flawless movie, and we still would have found a problem with it, right? But as I'm walking out, Christian Slater was behind me because it was this big New York premiere, right? And I'm like, wow, it's Christian Slater. When am I going to get to talk to him again? So I turn around and I go, Christian, what did you think of the movie? And he says, visually stunning. And that was all he said. And it was funny because, like,
it's true. It is visually stunning,
and especially by 1999 standards, the film was.
It really holds up too. It's amazing.
It does. It really does. But I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate, similar to what you were saying, is the worlds it has built. Right, without building. You know, sometimes the first couple chapters of the book are not as exciting or as perfect as you tend to look back on them as after you've read the entire story, right? And the way it has created this universe, which we now we completely take for granted. It's,
right.
Of course.
I was telling my wife, like, it's amazing thinking that like my daughter knows the term Padawan. Like we've been
Right.
calling her that like her entire life. And I'm thinking like back in 1999, we were like, what is this weird term? Why do they have braids? This makes no sense. This is like, why did, and the same thing with like the Naboo ships. Why do they all look like 50s cars, you know?
Right.
And now we've just accepted that this is a tonally different, stylistically different era and location of
Mm-hmm.
galaxy. And I think like I don't come around to it. And they I tell them like you really have to see Clone Wars. And like I sent them watch like viewing guides.
Mm-hmm.
Because I said like the best of Clone Wars takes the best parts of the prequels and just writes the stories so much better. And like the characterization is so much sharper in there. And like for me, I cannot separate prequel Obi-Wan, Anakin, Padme, and Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
I can't separate that from the prequel trilogy. Like
Right.
it's just like this thing for me, and because of it, it's like this really dense and awesome, massive piece of Star Wars.
It's interesting because I had never thought about it until somewhat, I guess, about a year ago. If you don't watch the Clone Wars, and it's funny too because I think our perception of the prequels, as you were just alluding to, changes because of the Clone Wars,
Yeah.
because of that additional material, like the frustration that Anakin shows in the Rise
Yes.
of Skywalker. Oh, I'm sorry, the Revenge of the Sith. That frustration, it kind of comes from out of nowhere. Clearly, George had some of these ideas in his head, and of course, from a filmmaking perspective, you got to move the story along, blah blah blah. But now, if you add into that the Ahsoka story and the frustration with the way she was treated and what he had to witness, it's not a surprise that he's just at his wit's end with this council, and it does make it easier for Palpatine to kind of turn the screw and move him into that dark place a lot easier.
I was I was talking about this with my wife because I was telling her like she hadn't watched Clone Wars. She's only heard me like talk about it, and she knows that a lot of people love it. And so I was telling her that one of the best things that it does is that it positions Anakin in like he's pulled in all these directions where like Palpatine is his cool uncle who is always like, you're awesome. People should listen to you. And then the Jedi are just always telling him like, well, you are the chosen one, but no, don't do that.
Right.
And then, his Padawan is just like, betrayed by them. And then Obi-Wan is just like enabling everyone because he always wants to be like the nice guy, but the nice guy in difficult situations always kind of screws up,
Right. Right.
because
Yep.
because they need to say something. So it like he's constantly pulled in every direction, and then finally when you go from that to Revenge of the Sith, where it's like, hey, my wife is going to die unless I listen to my cool uncle who has never been mean to me. And then you have Mace Windu who's like, take a seat, Skywalker. It's like, who are you going to listen to? Really? Like, it really makes sense. It feels very organic from that perspective.
Yeah, it's wild the way the story has evolved. I don't want to give away the last line of your article, so I'm just going to tell people to go and read it because it's so. I mean, you could talk about it if you want to. I don't want to. I don't want to spoiler it because it's such a cool concept that your daughter pulled out of it. But I'll share a quick thing with you to get your perspective on it, and if you want to go there, feel free. But so we watched, my daughter and I. She's 11 now, so she was 10 when Rise of Skywalker came out, and we did a marathon. Now she had seen the other movies, and so we did 1 through 8, and we watched it in that order. But it was interesting because she didn't make the connection between Palpatine and Sidious. So when
really?
Right. And so here's the thing, you and I, it was obvious if for no other reason because it was Ian McDermott, right? It's okay. So
right. Yeah, exactly.
Guy, right. So that was a little too telegraphed for those of us who were paying attention, which was everybody. But she of course didn't make that connection. And I remember after the Phantom Menace, she had asked a question like, "Who's that creepy guy?" I'm like, "Well, you're gonna have to watch it, and we'll see." And when he comes out to Anakin as the Sith Lord in Revenge of the Sith, she turned to me and she said, "I knew there was something not right about that guy." Which to me, like, I took that so much for granted. I never thought that essentially became her "I am your father" moment. And,
yeah.
And that, because she already had known that, just because she was alive for 10 years.
Right.
And
We
so,
protected my daughter against that. Like we worked really, really hard to preserve the "I am your father" thing. But
how
go
did you
ahead.
do it? No. How did you keep?
Um,
I mean,
we
I mean,
well,
six.
we're,
Luckily, you're pretty protected, but still, I mean,
yeah, I'd
it's so
say like
pervasive in culture.
I think like we some of our friends even gave us like the Darth Vader and son and like Darth Vader and daughter like the
Oh,
books. Like we
yeah.
just stowed those away. Did not did not read those. Um, any sort of allusion to it in any book, we just skipped right over that part.
Mm,
And I think we were fortunate enough that at her age, um, it's not something she really talked about with her friends. You know,
right.
like with her friends, like they talked about like Frozen or Daniel Tiger or something like
Right.
that. And so we caught her. Like I had actually asked some of my other friends, what age do you think they will intellectually be able to comprehend like the actual story of Star Wars, and not just like this is a fun adventure and there's lightsabers and there's ships. We wanted it to be more than that.
Yeah.
So everyone said like around 5 to 6 is like when
Yep.
they can really start to follow the story. So when we had first started talking about it, I think she was 4.5, and we took her to see Captain Marvel. Like that was her first like
Mm-hmm.
live action movie.
Mm-hmm.
She followed the story and she really loved it. And then when we watched it again on Blu-ray, like she was able to follow the entire story.
Mm-hmm.
So we were like, okay, we think we're ready for Star Wars. Let's start really planning this out. And amazingly, this kid does not seem to connect Mace Windu to Nick Fury. Like I don't know how. Like they are the same person. I know.
That's great. And it's funny too, because I don't know about your daughter, but like there's something about Star Wars that keeps an attention span. Like I years and years ago, actually around when the prequels came out, I've had a nephew who at the time was about 4 or 5. He wouldn't sit and watch like Wizard of Oz, but he would watch Star Wars from beginning to end, and he couldn't watch 20 minutes of well, who can watch 20 minutes of Teletubbies? But he just something about Star Wars pulls you in, and I guess I think we talked a little bit about it before, but it's a testament to the storytelling style, I think, of George Lucas, in that he's created a complex story and there's layers in it. If you're a 5-year-old, you can get the adventure. If you're, and now that we're older, and we could look at the prequels, and while the politics may seem out of place, it's 100% in place, and it's telling a story, a cautionary tale that was 20 years ahead of its time in many ways.
And I think it's funny because even my friends who were like huge original trilogy friends and like big nerds with me in the 90s playing the PC games and stuff like that, that like really bash on the prequels, like as fascism has been on the rise in many different parts of the world over the past 5 years, and you start to read these stories about like disinformation and just the way that these messages are communicated. Like I've had several friends be like, wow, maybe I should have paid attention to the politics of the prequel trilogy. But one thing that you were saying about like your nephew's attention span, so the only movie that my daughter really had trouble sitting through was Attack of the Clones, because she's like in the first half, like once it hits like the search for Shmi, and like then like the pacing really picks up in that movie. But she was like, she did not understand what was happening on Camino at all. She said that like Anakin was being a dramatic teenager, which he was. But I love like her phrasing of that. So she kind of struggled with that, but then like it was interesting with Revenge of the Sith. So like the first act, it's like a big Clone Wars episode, and she had seen I think like 4 or 5 Clone Wars episodes at that point. So like she was all in on that. And then like when the idea that Padme might die, like that kind of like froze her, and she's like, well, what is this about? And then there's the scene you said like your daughter, that got your daughter, about like when Anakin confronts him. Like she was just absolutely silent. Like Anakin draws his lightsaber, and then Palpatine's like, are you going to kill me? And like I turned to look at her, and she's like this, like just totally in tune with it. And you could see that like for all the things that we give it grief about. She was so connected to, what will happen to Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme. And it's funny too, because like going back to the original trilogy, like she likes Han Solo, but she doesn't have that emotional connection to him that she does with Anakin.
And it's interesting because I think, again, in hindsight, and what I find really interesting too is now all the the rumors of Hayden Christensen coming in for part of the Obi-Wan series, which is being shot for Disney Plus.
Fingers crossed for that.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I will lose my mind if I see live action Anakin and Obi-Wan in Clone Wars garb. Holy cow, the Clone Wars cartoon stuff. Oh my gosh, I'll lose my mind. But it's funny. I say I'm about 8 or 9 years older than you. We all were like, oh, Hayden Christensen is awful. What a horrible choice. And now we love him and we love what he did for that character. And the fact that he connected with your daughter, again, it's that there must be different levels of the way Star Wars is received, because we should never go to a Star Wars movie and expect, we might get it, but we should not expect Oscar-worthy performances.
Yeah.
It just isn't written that way. But to deliver the character in a way that made your 6-year-old daughter just care so much about him, that speaks a lot about what he gave us.
And I think one thing that I realized way after the fact was, and I remember reading this when they were making Attack of the Clones, and it was like an Entertainment Weekly or something. This was like an early interview where he talked about like really trying to like take apart the way that James Earl Jones spoke and trying to like mimic that cadence, because like he does not talk like Anakin in real life, and he's in this really really great independent film called Shattered Glass, that like won or was nominated for a bunch of awards, and he does not sound like Anakin at all. So you're like, what happened there? And then like it took this viewing for me to like really remember that he's trying to mimic that cadence, and you are in a no-win situation there, because Vader's voice is not a natural voice. So if you try to go there, you're gonna sound weird. But then if you don't go there, then people are gonna say like, why don't you sound like Darth Vader? So you're just kind of hosed. I noticed. Did you listen to the Dr. Aphra audio drama?
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, was it Mark Thompson who did Vader in that? I can't remember.
Yep.
So I put it together. Because I listened to that maybe like a month ago or 2 months ago, and it was like kind of in the middle of this cycle that we were doing with my daughter. And I was listening to him, the way that he was performing Vader, and like you hear enough of his like regular intonations, but like his cadence is like he is trying to talk like Darth Vader. And then like I would just like, I think because we were watching the prequels at the time, it just connected him like, oh my god, they are trying to talk like James Earl Jones, like that weird way he enunciates vowels and stuff like that. And so I think like not a lot of people really give Hayden credit for going there. Like as a creative choice, like maybe pull it back a little next time. Like I love what Lanter did in the Clone Wars, because it's kind of like this hybrid between his normal speaking voice and what Hayden did, and it's a little bit more natural, and it's much easier to connect to. But I think a lot of people overlook that as an actor's choice, and it makes sense. It's just you're in a no-win situation.
Yeah, I mean it's similar in a way to it was a lot easier step, I think, for Ewan to connect to Alec Guinness. I think they were just sort of naturally already. That was actually part of one of the reasons I believe that they selected him. But even Alden Ehrenreich in Solo, who was put in a position where do you do a Harrison Ford impression for 2 hours or
yeah.
And he didn't. He just picked up enough of the style to bring it to life.
Yeah, it's like it's funny because Donald Glover, like God, he did a spot on Billy D. Williams impersonation, and it was so awesome. But I think it's almost harder to do a Harrison Ford, because you Harrison Ford like on this like to your bones level, and it's not a challenge that you really want to face up to. So I think like I loved Solo. I I really hope they do some more stuff with that cast because,
Yeah.
like I know like the business reasons why it didn't do as well as everyone hoped, and like yeah, that's fine.
Mhm.
But creatively, it's a great fun movie, and it really slots into. I think that there's what's really great about Star Wars now. Like I actually have an article about this on a geek site called The Portalist. Is Star Wars is not special anymore, and what I mean by that is like in the '90s, we waited 3 years for every movie, and the build up to the Phantom Menace was like this impossible thing.
Yeah.
And like now we have like regular releases on either movies or video games or books or TV shows, and you can just pick and choose the parts that you really really like. And because of that, I think like we need more of like the solo cast that you've built because they're awesome, and like they get the characterization, and it's okay to move away from the Force. Like let's. And the Mandalorian has been so successful at that. So, yeah, I'm assuming everyone who's listening to this has already seen Solo, but I know there's some people who resist it. Please watch Solo; it's so great.
Yeah. Are you you must be a fan of the Make Solo 2 Happen movement?
Yes. Like if you search through my Twitter history, I've used that hashtag.
It's so cool, and the Resistance broadcast guys are so cool, and they're having a lot of fun with that, and hopefully it'll happen because
It's funny because like I mean there are pieces of the sequel trilogy that I really really enjoy. Like as a movie, I really love The Last Jedi. The Force Awakens, I really love that until Han Solo shows up. And it's kind of funny because it's like in the trailer, the first time I saw that, it's like my heart is telling me like that's Han Solo. Right. He's on the Falcon. Look at that. And then after the first time I viewed it and I was able to like think a little bit more critically about that, I'm like, God, I really wish there was less Han Solo in that movie because I was really getting attached to these new characters, and then it suddenly changes its focus to really just being like a Han movie. Yeah. I tell some of my friends that I think the sequel trilogy really would have been much more successful as a storytelling device if you took out the episode numbers. If it was just, we're going to continue Star Wars with a story that takes place 30 years after Return of the Jedi, and you're going to love these new characters, and you might see some old friends, but it's not the Skywalker saga. That's done.
That's a great
I think
point.
They would, because you were so hemmed in by like this massive responsibility of like, who are you going to satisfy? The new fans, the old fans who are jaded by the prequel trilogy, like the mega fans who know everything, whether the ones that watch Clone Wars. There's too many pieces to satisfy. And by calling it episode 7, 8, 9, you are just kind of stuck there. But if it was just like, we're going on new adventures, you're going to love these characters, they would have just not had that burden on them.
That is a fantastic point, and I think you've helped. This is why I love doing the show and getting different people's opinions, because hearing that I think that might be really kind of the crux of it. Because I think my biggest problem with Rise of Skywalker, among unfortunately many, but I didn't hate it.
I have some polite things I can say about that.
Right. It's a fun Star Wars movie, right? There has to be, but I think the challenge was it was attempting to wrap up 9 stories when it did a decent job of wrapping up those 3. And to your point, if those 3 were here's Star Wars now 30 years later, you wouldn't have had so much pressure on the First Order being related to the Empire. They could have been born of the Empire concepts. You didn't have to. It would be nice to see Luke and Leia and Han, but they didn't have to be. Didn't have to have a Skywalker direct connection. So I think that's a really, really great observation.
And I think one of the things is that like both JJ and Rian Johnson tried to take familiar story beats and do something with them. And I think they probably felt like they were not forced, but like that they should do that because it's part of like this greater tapestry. But if you're just saying like, if this trilogy was called Star Wars Resistance or something like that, not the TV show, and it's about three young people who come together to help General Leia's resistance movement because there's still evil in the galaxy. That's a much easier pitch to just say, like, we're going to do 3 adventures and it's going to be in the Star Wars galaxy, but it's not going to recycle any sort of old feelings from there, other than like Luke Skywalker walking by and saying hi, something like that.
Yep.
So yeah, it I feel like it was a really big it's like it was really successful in that it created a huge generation of fans. Like my daughter just loves Rey so much.
Same with my daughter.
Like of all the characters that she's seen, it's like Rey is number 1, Ahsoka is number 2, and then I think it's Anakin number 3. But so it's clearly successful in that, and like I love Finn and Poe Dameron, and there's a Rebecca Roanhorse's Resistance Reborn book is basically a Poe Dameron book, and it's so awesome, and I love Poe so much from that. So there's a lot of pieces to really like, but it doesn't necessarily feel cohesive, and I think it's because everyone overthought it. It's like there's this really big opportunity, and because we have to please so many different people, we're going to put out something that really can't please anyone fully at all.
Right.
So I and it's funny too, because like I feel that way about the prequel trilogy, which I clearly adore, and it's okay to do that. It's okay to recognize the criticisms of something that you love, because you still take away things that you love about it. So it's like, I don't want people to think like, oh, he must not love Star Wars because he's criticizing the sequel trilogy. It's like, I can criticize something in all the movies, so except Empire. Empire is perfect. There's nothing wrong with Empire. And it's one of the few perfect films ever made.
That's true. And I think that's one thing that I think, and if people aren't following you on Twitter, they absolutely must. I wish I had found you earlier, and now but it's great is I have a lot of things I can go back and look at. But I think that's one of the problems with social media is we, like, again, I do a Star Wars podcast. I have, I feel like this need to say before I criticize The Rise of Skywalker, but I still love it. But the reality is I shouldn't have to do that. I do it because I know that somebody's going to hear me say that and have an issue with it. But the reality is, yes, you can dislike things and still love everything else about it. And I think it comes from that place of passion. I think some of the most passionate arguments are because not because it disappointed you, but because it wasn't exactly everything you expected and wanted it to be.
And I think it's okay for it to be different. That was one of the things I really loved about The Last Jedi, is that like it was, I mean, like, I don't like the Canto Bight sequence. I think it's basically like a bottle episode of a TV show inserted into a Skywalker movie.
Yep.
But I love the concept of that. I love the message that it was trying to say, and I love the way, like, the character arc that it gave both Rose and Finn. I just wish it wasn't in the middle of episode 8.
Right.
And that's, like, those are the types of things that, like, it really frustrates me as, someone who's a fan of, like, all the big major geek franchises, that like you can't just have like this constructive conversation about that. It's like, and I know there are people who probably love that sequence and they're like, they get a lot out of it, and more power to them.
Yep.
I had a Twitter thread that I sent you right before we started recording, where I took apart Attack of the Clones, and it wasn't saying I hate Attack of the Clones. It was that like Anakin's character arc is really troubled because George Lucas didn't have someone come in and help him write this dialogue. And if you just tweak the dialogue this way to really show like this is where he's empty and this is where his passion is and these things are getting twisted around, then the whole thing, you could have kept the story exactly the same. All the same story beats about like assassination and Shmi Skywalker and like, Geonosis. You can keep all of that if you just change like 20 lines of dialogue in there. And I think most people recognize that, and they're like, okay, you love this thing, and here's your constructive way of how you would do it better based on your experience as a creator. There are some people who just get like really, really offended by that, and I'm like, I don't know what to do about that, because it's like, I want to talk about these things. I am not being mean about them, and it's like, and it's a fun discussion, so
well, all of it still works, and thankfully we're still, as you were saying, we're still getting we're spoiled with the amount of content
Yes.
we're getting,
Yeah.
and some of that content, of course, is coming on November 10th in the From a Certain Point of View. How did you like that segue? That was pretty good.
Nice. Good plug.
Empire Strikes Back, and you are one of the 40 authors in there with a fantastic story called Disturbance.
Mhm.
And where can people follow you on Twitter? And again, follow Mike Chen right now on Twitter if you love Star Wars and this kind of geekery. It's there all the time. Where can they follow you?
I'm most active on Twitter. It's Mike Chen Writer. It's very important to add the writer because there's Mike Chen, the YouTube food guy, who has like 1 million followers. That is not me. The one that tweets about Star Wars and Star Trek and Doctor Who, that's me. If he's tweeting about dumplings, that's not me. My website with updates and stuff on my books is mikechenbooks.com. I am on Instagram at Mike Chen Writer, but that's mostly just pictures of my dog. So, if you like dog pictures, you can follow me there too.
Well, awesome, Mike. This was really great. And like seriously, there were like 2 or 3 other topics on my list that I could have got into. If you're up to it, I will have you back again after the story comes out.
Yes, totally. I can talk about Star Wars for like 19 straight hours. So.
Well, great. Well, this was fantastic. Good luck with your book coming next year. You said, right?
Yeah, in January. It's called We Could Be Heroes. Yeah,
Be Heroes, and best of luck and congratulations on being part of From a Certain Point of View, Empire Strikes Back. And look forward to having you on again.
Thank you so much.